I was really strongly pulled to grab this wonderful volume, this book called Introduction to Tantra, A Vision of Totality. And I often will refer to this by Lama Yeshe. Lama Yeshe was a Tibetan master who passed away in 1983, so he hasn't been with us for a while, but there are YouTube videos of him. He was one of the first Karma Kagyu teachers in Tibetan Buddhism to bring a lot of the esoteric practices to the West. So, along with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who was a contemporary of his. And part of what makes Lama Yeshe in his writings so compelling is that he represents the Tantra, the Buddhist Tantra, the view of what we call Vajrayana. Vajra means thunderbolt. It means like lightning strike or thunderbolt. It also refers to a diamond because a diamond has this very crystalline, clear, and sharp kind of quality to it. And so Vajrayana, which is considered one of the third school of Buddhism, there's the Theravada, which is the more sort of monastic form of what we call Thai, like Thai forest traditions in Sri Lanka and Myanmar, Thailand, and that form is probably closest to the earliest forms of the teachings of the Buddha and the Buddhist community, the early community. The Pali Canon is largely preserved in the Pali language, Pali. And whereas the Mahayana, this what's called the greater vehicle of Buddhism that spread from northern India into Tibet, over to China, and then up into Japan and Korea, and we have what we now call Tibetan Buddhism, is largely kind of the harbinger, preserver of Mahayana, um, as well as Buddhist Chan and Zen. Those are all part of the greater vehicle. They are actually comprise many religions. And part of what came out of that Mahayana tradition is now what we call Vajrayana, which is the esoteric tantras. This is the tantric teachings that are there to help us achieve enlightenment in one lifetime. And whereas many of the other traditions are sort of what we might call in Mahayana, the graduated path, otherwise known as the Lam Rim, which is that we cultivate over a long period of time the preliminary teachings and then study the texts and move into deity and guru meditation and such, and that our realization ultimately can take lifetimes. But the Vajrayana, the Tantras, which is where I've spent most of my time teaching and training in Buddhism, um, really is more of an accelerated path. And so a lot of what's talked about in this school of Buddhism involves things like non-duality and using the experiences of this body and this life for transformation. So when we talk about taking something like suffering and transmuting that into compassion and using meditation practice like Tonglen, or which we've done here many times, or working with purification breathing, the Salung, the breath meditations. A lot of those are specific to the Vajrayana, and they're designed to help us transform and metabolize things within our life that might constitute suffering or difficulty, and as well as pleasure, as well as things that we might fit into the category of passion and desire. And so Lama Yeshe was all about sort of teaching how do we work with the things of this world that give us a sense of enjoyment, but rather than having them lead to any kind of sort of self-destruction or to further clinging and further aversion and more suffering, how can they be liberating? And this is really the task of Vajrayana Buddhism. So balance is a big part of this, balancing with cultivating bodhicitta, but also cultivating equanimity. And bodhicitta is that aspiration to awaken through the compassion that we bring to others who are suffering. And in that relationship of of easing suffering or having this aspiration to alleviate suffering, that we too awaken in that process. That it's mutually, our awakening depends on others' well-being and their awakening, and vice versa. And so we recognize that we're in this. Now, some of this also involves getting the energy channels in the body to be balanced as well, and so on, as well as how we look at things like pleasure and desire. And so we're not just talking about sensuality and sexuality and all of that, and that can certainly be part of this path. But we're really talking about stimulus driven pleasure as opposed to pleasure that is more intrinsically arising out of the underlying nature of who we are. So I'm going to we'll begin by reading you this passage from Lama Yeshe's book. So it might be a little fragmented. As I said, this just came to me to do this literally a minute before I turned my camera on. So who knows where we're headed here. But I've learned not to overthink any of this stuff. So Lama Yeshe writes about images of wholeness and writes about Tantra here. Tantra not only teaches us how to take advantage of our ordinary pleasurable experiences, it also shows us how to activate a deeper, more intense, and ultimately more satisfying experience of bliss than is ordinarily available through our physical senses. At present, our search for pleasure is habitually directed outwards towards some external object of our desire. And when we cannot find or hold on to these desired objects, we become frustrated and unhappy. For example, many of us are looking for the person of our dreams, someone who will be the source of limitless happiness for us. Yet, no matter how many boyfriends or girlfriends we might collect, these dreams remain largely unfulfilled. What we do not realize is that within each and every one of us is an unlimited source of both male and female energy. So many of our problems arise because we are either ignorant of or we suppress what we have within us. Men try to hide their female side, and women are afraid of expressing their male energy. As a result, we may feel cut off from something we need. So, when we do not feel whole and therefore turn expectantly towards other people for the qualities missing in ourselves in the hope of gaining some sense of completeness, much of our behavior becomes affected by insecurity and possessiveness. If necessary, great yogis and yoginis can spend years in solitary isolation without feeling lonely. Yet we may feel unbearably lonely if we are separated from our significant other, even for one day. Why is there such a great difference between ourselves and the yogis? It has to do with our own internal energies. As long as we are fragmented and unbalanced, we will remain desperate for the company of others and incapable of being satisfied. However, if our inner balance, what we might call our inner mandala, were complete, we would never experience this loneliness at all. So I'm going to end here. And he goes on to talk about the male and the female, the masculine, the feminine, sort of within each of us. That it's not something that we just take in the forms in which we embody in this life. The interesting part of some of this, and I think what Lama Yeshe is trying to tell us, is that that the bliss that we are looking for, the pleasure, the pleasurable experience, the heaven, if you will, that we seek, is already within us. And this is something that the tantric view makes very clear over and over again. That if you've ever been in love before, or been even infatuated with someone, this feeling that comes with projecting heaven onto that person, sort of having us perhaps miss red flags or whatever it may be. That's very natural. But the interesting thing is that we are mistaken if we think that that heaven is outside of us in that moment. And my teacher Leslie talked about this often. She said it's not so easy to get this sometimes, but if we're capable of feeling this quality of bliss because of another person or something outside of us, we're capable of feeling the source of where that comes from, and that is within us, or we'd never feel it. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, it often feels like it happens in interaction with someone else, like there's a chemistry, quote unquote, right? And absolutely, of course, no one's denying that. Um, but I think this point that whatever we seek, whatever feeling we seek, is already there, perhaps in an unmanifested or form of potentiality within us already. I can tell you that through meditation practice, through deep meditation practice, these experiences begin to arise on their own. And all of a sudden, this neediness, this clinging that we all have, especially if we are lonely, all of a sudden evaporates. Maybe some of you have had this experience in meditation where you feel, wow, I'm actually feeling a fullness that I didn't have before, or I'm feeling a belonging or an accompaniment in my practice. Exactly, exactly. That seeking for that moment no longer is directed out onto others, but is sort of self-evident through our practice. Mhm. So it's not just about sort of calming the mind and feeling relaxed and peaceful, but it's also in the Vajrayana view is about sort of getting in touch with this what we might call what is it light heat bliss quality of the central channel, of that innermost quality that allows us to be conscious in the first place. Yeah. And so we're going to do a spinal breathing practice shortly, where hopefully we can sort of safely engage some of that energy. It's really helpful to to do two things, and one is to recognize first and foremost that we have this quality of bliss already at the center of who we are, and second, that it's okay to feel the bliss. It's okay to feel passion for things in life. Often, this is a misunderstanding that people have about meditation and enlightenment, or whatever you want to call it, that it means you can't love things anymore and you can't enjoy a piece of chocolate and you can't enjoy a roller coaster, which have never enjoyed. But some people like those things. Um, or a really good, like, moment on the tennis court where everything just flows and man, I just nailed that point. you know? Um, Yeah, this is life. This is life. And we're encouraged to experience passion in our lives. We just know that it's fleeting. If it's stimulus driven and dependent on something outside of us, it'll be here and then it'll evaporate. So enjoy it while you have it, but then letting it go. That's the teaching here, at least around things that are pleasurable. I think the takeaway here is it's okay to enjoy life. It's okay to be passionate, to indulge in a movie that you would be embarrassed telling anybody that you're watching. Believe me, I have those too. I've been getting involved in the Schitt's Creek episodes. Good Lord, that's 6 seasons. When will this thing end? It's hilarious. It won all these Emmys, but I never would have dreamed to watch it. But someone encouraged me to start watching it, and now I cannot stop. So it's very well written, I think. Anyway, so I just told you. I haven't told anyone else for that reason. Um, the point is that we can enjoy these things, right? We can enjoy a good meal, a cup of coffee. We can relish in it, but we also see it for what it is. Not to be afraid of the pleasure and of the bliss. Enjoy life and dig into it. This is the way of the Tantra, is even if it's suffering, even if it's a really good self-pity party, indulge it, dive into it. Just make it as human and as uncomfortable as you can, but just don't get stuck in that and think that this is the totality. That's the key. Um, and so the tantric path then tells us, okay, if you're getting stuck, if you're sort of following this thing and you're getting off the path and the blissful part of your practice starts, you start expecting it every time, then you haven't really learned how to just appreciate something and allow it to go, right? And this is part of what Lama Yeshe and the Tantras tell us. Be careful of the bliss too, because it can mire you into expectation and into craving. I want this, or I'm not going to enjoy my meditation anymore. I need to feel this, or else. And then when I don't, my whole practice falls apart, and maybe I'm off the path, and that's counterproductive. So we work with whatever arises in any moment. It may be blissful, it may be hell. But within that mud, as this cliche goes, the mud and the lotus. No mud, no lotus. And I would also say, no beauty, no lotus. So it's not just the bad stuff, but it's also the stuff that we appreciate. I've been thinking about this anyway, and maybe this is why I picked up this book a minute ago, just because of how much I'm in awe of the colors and the grass and the flowers that are popping up everywhere. Um, it's maybe it's because of the year we've had, but my heart is just melting every time I walk by this one house around the corner where this a woman who is probably 90, I think she's 95 now, and every spring she goes out and cultivates these tulips and these incredible flowers. It's a huge front yard and it's filled with colorful flowers. She does it all by herself. She was out there the other day with all of her equipment, moving very slowly and taking time to get up. But wow, it's beautiful. And the point is that we can really relish the beauty. We can relish the beauty, whether it's an encounter with a beloved, whether it's lovemaking, or it's a cup of coffee with a friend who's really hearing you, or it's taking in a beautiful sunset, or it's relishing in a painting or in doing something, and maybe it's relishing going really fast downhill on your bicycle and getting a rush from that. Whatever it is, just be careful and wear a helmet if you do that one. So we're not being told to forego all desire or else in these practices. What we're being invited to through the precepts of Buddhism is rather to basically conduct ourselves ethically and in ways that honor other people and not create suffering, but not to get too attached to those things either. So having said that, coming back to this tantric view of projecting heaven, it's okay even to fall in love or to be infatuated with someone, but be aware of where it's coming from. Know that the source of that is already within you. And even if you're relishing in that experience with that person, be aware that the mirror, that to own the mirror basically, and know that the feelings you're having are belong to you as well. It's not unless someone has given you a love potion and you drank it. It's like, okay, I'm under a spell, because it can feel that way. Um, so anyway, part of, I think, the practice of tantra is to really engage with our senses fully, without being fully attached to them, without sort of um, uh, letting them rule the day, if you will, without letting them become the tyrant. And that includes meditation when it feels good. It includes the breath work we do. It includes the opening and the letting go. The letting go is where the freedom is, not in the indulging. Letting go is where the freedom is, not so much in the indulging of things that we enjoy. And the last thing I'll say about this too is that people who have mixed feelings about what it means to be free or to be liberated are afraid of what they're going to lose in the process. This may be true for all of us. That, if I keep meditating and I keep going, I may lose the things that are important to me. But you know what? The truth is, you actually will probably experience them more deeply. You probably will experience them more deeply because all the filters of need, all the filters of expectation are gone. You can love more deeply when you have no agenda for another person, right? Does that make sense? That you can love more deeply, you can have an even more sort of intense experience of enjoying something when it's an unfiltered experience of pure experience, of open experience. So indulging, letting yourself be fully human in the process, and also also relishing in the freedom of letting go too. If we can do this, if we can practice this, if we can master this sort of waves that we ride more easily, life changes dramatically. Yeah. So it may seem like an ideal, but it's no different than simply practicing basic mindfulness of breath, abiding in a body that is relaxed and awake. We start going there. We start having that taste. We start opening more and more to that possibility just with that simple action. When we abide in deep sense of simplicity and effortlessness, simply in being, we are actually accessing that more than we realize. And the world becomes present to us. So, not to think that this is some weird, ideal, abstract, unreachable thing, but practicing it in small ways, that's, I think, where the skill is. In small ways. The way of flow, the way of flow within impermanence, and also appreciation and genuine enjoyment of life, the enjoyment body that we live in, but keeping our perspective clear and insightful.